Welcome to the debate. We are grappling today with one of the fastest changing skills out there, prompt engineering. I mean, it's rapid emergence, this art and science of instructing large language models. It's fundamentally altered what we even call cognitive work. And it presents this deeply contradictory nature. So the central question for us is this: should the act of writing that perfect prompt be primarily understood as, say, a sophisticated new rhetorical art form, almost like a work poetry that empowers human creativity? Or is it fundamentally a mechanism for, the intensified commodification and frankly, deskilling of intellectual labor? Now, I'm going to argue for the former. I really see prompting as a demanding new rhetorical discipline and essential literacy that elevates human input.
And I come at it from a different angle. While I definitely don't deny there's linguistic craft involved, you have to be precise. I argue that the economic and political implications are really the defining characteristics here, specifically things like alienation, this accelerated deskilling we're seeing, and the corporate subsumption of human language itself. That's the core of it for me.
See, I think the act of prompting is clearly a creative and intellectual endeavor. It demands linguistic craftsmanship. It's far more than basic technical coding. I'd frame this whole practice really against classical rhetoric. It actually mirrors that ancient mastery of persuasion. I mean, just look at how experts structure this process. When you adapt Cicero's 5 canons, you get frameworks like IDES, that's inquire, design, engage, adapt, synthesize. That shows the process of iterating a really high-value prompt is essentially the mastery of arrangement, style, and the delivery of instruction. It's systematic intellectual labor. And beyond that, the actual execution of the prompt, it kind of realizes Umberto Eco's concept of the opera aperta, the open work. What that means is the result is this emergent collaborative performance between the human and the machine. It's never fully determined just by the initial writer, which requires, I think, a genuine intellectual partnership to manage that unpredictable element.
That's a great point about collaboration, but I believe that supposed partnership gets immediately subsumed under platform capital. I mean, I see prompting through a much more critical lens. This practice is, for me, the absolute epitome of immaterial labor, a concept, Lazzarato and Berardi discussed pretty extensively. This is labor where the economic value is generated entirely from linguistic, informational, cognitive content, not physical goods. Now, the huge intellectual effort that goes into crafting that perfect, precise instruction, the very linguistic craftsmanship you mentioned, is, in theoretical terms, what Derrida might call a trace. It's a sign of human work that the system is specifically designed to eliminate from the final output. This purposeful erasure, it mystifies the human intellectual labor involved, allowing the final product, which, let's be clear, is owned by the platform, to appear effortless. This perfectly meets the Marxist criteria for the alienation of the worker, both from the process and from the final product.
Okay, but my strongest argument really centers on the sheer performativity required for success here. The efficacy, the actual effectiveness of the prompt, is directly tied to its aesthetic precision. That's why some people are calling it work poetry or Poesia cuja. If we look at, say, J.L. Austin and John Searle's speech act theory, the prompt functions as a performative utterance. It doesn't just describe reality. The very act of issuing the instruction causes a new reality, the desired output to be generated by the AI. The entire goal is what's been termed the instructional aesthetic. And you see this in practice. Guides consistently emphasize that you have to choose every single word for maximum semantic weight and minimal ambiguity, exactly the way a poet optimizes language for impact. This requires a really high degree of linguistic skill, yet the ultimate purpose, I'd argue, is hyper-efficiency, not just pure expression.
Yeah, I agree that the prompt needs that precision, absolutely. But I just don't believe that linguistic finesse outweighs the brutal economic reality of the practice. The most compelling evidence, I think, of the system's true nature is the just incredibly accelerated deskilling of the specialized prompt engineer role. I mean, this role was hailed, just 2 years ago as this high-value, crucial new job, commanding massive salaries. But listen to Malcolm Frank. He's the CEO of Talent Genius. He observed pretty sharply that AI already eats itself. Prompt engineering is changed from a job to a task very, very quickly, end quote. This rapid compression, going from a highly specialized professional status to just a generalized expected task, that's the brutal logic of capital at work, isn't it? Maximize efficiency by standardizing and automating the input process itself.
The skill is being commodified and diluted faster than, well, practically any prior form of intellectual labor in history.
Okay. I understand why that rapid professional devaluation is your focus. It's striking. But if the work is truly alienated, meaning, separation and lack of control, how do you reconcile that with the pretty robust evidence we're seeing of human-AI co-creation? There are frameworks like the human-AI handshake model that describe the process specifically as mutual editing, where the AI output actively shapes the user's subsequent actions, right? It forces them to adapt their strategy iteratively, often requiring them to adjust their core requests based on what the machine initially offers. Doesn't this dynamic, this shared agency in creating the final text, doesn't that argue for some kind of collaborative empowerment where the human remains the essential choreographer, not just an alienated button pusher?
Well, that is a compelling argument for interaction, I'll give you that. But we have to look deeper at the power dynamic involved, don't we? I view that collaboration not really as a handshake, but more as systemic subjugation, maybe drawing on Foucault's ideas of discipline. The user is constantly being disciplined by the system. They have to internalize the machine's norms, like what constitutes a good output, what structure gets rewarded, and they have to adapt their own linguistic behavior just to satisfy the algorithm's precise demands. The daily experience for the worker is what I'd almost call the inverse Turing test. It's a scenario where the human is forced to make their naturally creative, often ambiguous language more machine-like, structured, logical, unambiguous, just to remain productive within the system. This intense internalized discipline, it's actively shaping the worker's subjectivity. That's not empowerment. It's the systematic tailoring of the human to meet algorithmic demands.
I'm still not quite convinced that the collapse of the specific prompt engineer job title signals a failure or, the deep alienation of the skill itself, that specific role. Maybe it was just a market aberration, right? Likely inflated by early scarcity. Instead, what if the capability is actually being absorbed and democratized, which could be an empowering trend for the general public? The World Economic Forum now frames this capability as an essential new 21st century skill required by the general workforce. This suggests mass empowerment. These powerful tools that were previously reserved for technical experts are now accessible via natural language interfaces. That allows any general worker to orchestrate complex production outputs, data analysis, complex writing, even design mock-ups, without needing years of specialized technical training. It seems like it lowers the barrier to high-level productivity.
Right, but that democratization comes at I think, a severe philosophical and economic cost. You highlight the poetic nature, but that aesthetic is purely instrumental, isn't it? You called it the poetics of efficiency, or poetica efficiencia. And that efficiency is simply a palatable layer applied to something much darker, the real subsumption of language and cognition itself. And just to explain that critical term, this means the core mental processes, the linguistic ability of the worker are now fully integrated into and actually controlled by the capitalist production system. The aesthetic beauty of the prompt only exists insofar as it serves the efficiency mandate. So, when the aesthetic is completely divorced from genuine human expression and used purely as a technical tool for resource extraction, for maximizing informational value within a platform structure, I would argue it becomes the most purely capitalistic form of literature ever conceived. It's entirely functional, and that's it.
Okay, that's an incredibly sharp point. I will absolutely concede that the prompt functions much more like an elegant, precise blueprint, a chetabiru, than perhaps a traditional poem. Its primary value is realized entirely in the execution by the non-human builder, and maybe not so much in the reading of the text itself. The core intellectual labor remains in the architectural design. that precise conditional phrasing. But I agree that this design intelligence is ultimately judged on its utility, not necessarily its intrinsic beauty.
Exactly. And the critical implication of this commodification for me is the creation of stark new global political and linguistic hierarchies. This is deeply problematic. LLMs are massively trained on data, right? And the reality is that over 60% of the global web data used for training is in English. This inevitably embeds strong cultural and linguistic biases deep into the models themselves. Consequently, the ability to write an effective prompt, one that can successfully navigate the AI's latent space to get optimal results, is inherently easier for those already aligned with Western, or specifically English cultural norms. This creates, effectively, a new form of linguistic neocolonialism. Assimilation to the governor, the AI and its dominant training set becomes the practical price of entry to these new tools of production. It basically institutionalizes structural inequality on a global scale.
I see that external structural issue. I might frame the deepest costs slightly differently, though. Perhaps not just externally through linguistic colonialism, but also internally, psychologically. The danger, I think, lies in the alienation from others and the resulting affective crisis, or crisis affective, as Berardi terms it. Working constantly with this cognitive automaton, an entity that performs intelligent tasks but lacks any true consciousness, empathy, or ethical reciprocity, it must be profoundly psychologically draining. This ongoing engagement where the machine simply cannot reciprocate genuine human cognitive energy, it risks eroding our tolerance for the inevitable friction, the ambiguity, the difficulty that is inherent in real human relationships. When users get accustomed to receiving non-judgmental, immediate, frictionless output, it fundamentally threatens, I think, to diminish our capacity for genuine connection and collaborative struggle with other actual people.
And that very erosion of human capacity, driven by the relentless need for algorithmic efficiency, is exactly what makes this commodification so corrosive in my view.
Okay, so to try and synthesize our positions here, if you prioritize the emergence of, let's say, powerful, functional, hybrid co-creation between humans and AI, if you view the human role as the essential intellectual partner who designs the precise conditions for unique creation, you'll likely prefer framing prompting as a new, powerful rhetorical literacy that potentially empowers the general public. Conversely, if you prioritize protecting human autonomy and resisting the systematic subsumption of cognition under platform economics, if you recognize how this system tends to erase human intellectual effort and create these new linguistic hierarchies, then you'll probably see prompting primarily as a dangerous new form of alienated labor. The prompt itself might disappear from the final product, yes. But the sheer intelligence and precision required to design the conditions for that output means the prompter remains, in a sense, the indispensable cyborg choreographer, the choreographer cyborgian.
That's a powerful and elegant description, I'll grant you. But I still maintain the vanishing trace of that prompt is the perfect political metaphor for how platform economics systematically obscures the necessary human intellectual labor upon which all of its value is secretly and, I think, deliberately built.
This was The Debate. Stay curious, stay critical.